Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your host, Brian Gracely. And if you were a little confused as to who was doing the introduction for the show today, that was my daughter, Sarah, who for 14 years now has been watching through the glass of my window of the door to my office. She has been asking me for years and years, Dad, when can I come on the podcast? I'd love to be on the podcast. Not necessarily to talk about technology, but she's been, since, like I said, she was 3 or 4 years old, she's been watching and seeing this microphone in my office and having to tell her friends, like, why does Dad have all this weird stuff in the office, like big microphones and lights and sound canceling things hanging from the walls and so forth. So she is heading off to college tomorrow. So I thought, well, I get one last chance, one last day with her before we take her off to college. And I thought, this would be the perfect opportunity for her to kick off the show. So that was her, her thing she's been wanting to do for 14 years. And I was excited to let her do it even for a few seconds. So anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Another weekend perspective. And, as I'm getting ready to take the second daughter off to college, Aaron's taking his daughter off to college. Him and I are both kind of going through it from a kid's perspective, kind of them moving on to a next phase of their life. It did get us thinking a little bit, having some perspective, true perspective on the show and kind of where cloud computing's taken us over the last, for us, 14 years now of having done the show. So thought what I would do is, kind of walk through 3 or 4 goods and bads of what parts of the cloud evolution have really laid the foundation for where we are today in 2024, sort of at the the beginning, the early stages of the AI era. We'll see if it really does pan out to be the AI era, but the cloud era has very much become mature. More than 14 years that we've been covering it, probably 14, 15, 16 years now that people have really kind of thought about cloud computing. And so I thought what I would do today is kind of walk through. I've got 4 goods and 4 bads in terms of what parts of the cloud evolution have laid the foundation for today, what things are in place for the next evolution, the next disruption, whatever it might be, if it's AI, if it's something else that comes along. And so I'll start with, and these are in no particular order, but I'll kind of go, I'll go glass half empty first and then glass half full. So I think on the glass half empty side, Shadow IT, the sort of initial thing that really kicked off cloud computing when cloud computing was first available, whether it was Salesforce or whether it was the earliest of early AWS services or whatever it might be, kicked off sort of the era of Shadow IT, the ability for anybody to say, I don't have to go through central IT. I don't have to listen when you tell us that, you can't do something for us. It's too expensive. It takes too long, whatever it might be. And you could go to the cloud. You could go directly to the cloud yourself. And so I think while Shadow IT was a kind of a break the glass ceiling type of activity, was necessary in order for our industry to move forward and people to just sort of say enough. I need to be able to do better, and it was important for the cloud to be there to be different and new and unique. I think from an enterprise IT perspective, from the skill sets that still reside in enterprise IT, the way that enterprise IT works today and so forth, I really think it's sort of set it back 5 to 10 years, even though they still have many of the same responsibilities, the same sort of budgeting. I feel like a lot of the skills that may have grown up in enterprise IT, that may have become the experts in that space, have sort of moved away from that sort of function. And that may not be a bad thing, but I do think that, if we look at what's left of enterprise IT, the centralized decision-making process, being able to be responsible for kind of all the capabilities of the business, both in the exciting times when you're rolling out new applications, but also when things go wrong or when you're dealing with difficult things. I think they've struggled so much. I think they've been somewhat neglected in terms of, the growth of cloud. And obviously, cloud capabilities have grown up in a lot of companies, but I think the core functions, whether they're security or networking or enterprise architecture, some things that were very established capabilities, I feel like those have slipped somewhat. And we'll look back and see, as the next foundation comes along, the next disruption comes along, are well prepared our enterprises to be able to take that on, or have they sort of cored themselves out somewhat from the middle, the core capabilities that they need, and running around struggling to find the skill sets to be able to do those common things that maybe their AI capabilities will be built upon. Second thing I have in the glass half full category, or I guess first thing in the glass half full, second thing on my list is technology experimentation, which really just didn't exist prior to the cloud. The ability to say, hey, we want to go out and try something for a couple of months, didn't exist. You had to go purchase hardware, you had to purchase software, you were committed for a year, you had to do capacity planning. All of the technology experimentation that was really the the cornerstone of getting started with the cloud, that has become the norm. It's become the norm for technologists all the way up to business leaders, right? The idea that you can have an idea, you can say, hey, how can we apply technology to this business idea, and try and get into a new market, try and shape what our customer experience looks like, how we interact with data, how we work with our partners, whatever that might be, has really become the norm today, right? Nobody ever questions, hey, can we try and do this? And say, well, you're going to have to go through a year-long planning process and capital allocation, and work with accounting to deal with what the depreciation schedule is going to be. No, it's just, hey, go out and try it. Go out to the cloud, or go out to, if you've got internal resources in your organization that you can just sort of get on demand. On-demand experimentation has become the norm, and the knowledge that type of capability exists, and that capability leads to a lot of positive outcomes, whether the outcome turns out to be fully successful or not, but positive outcomes in the sense of understanding what's possible is very much the norm for technologists, but again, all the way up through business leaders. So I think that's a very, very good net positive and glass half full. Second thing I have in my glass half empty, so number 3, but number 2 in the bad list, we still, 10, 15 years into this, we still really don't know how to measure the cost of the cloud. We don't really have a great sense of how to measure the cost of our technology buys or the ROI of this technology, right? We still have, tons of companies who are trying to help you control your spending. People don't really understand, how to translate things that are billed per second, per minute, per gigabyte, per flow. We don't really know how to do that. We still have dashboards that are so complicated that people are forgetting about things that are over in US West or US East, or they're getting a weird bill from the cloud, or they get a 50,000 line bill from the cloud. So we still really don't know how to do that. The idea that the best way to, not expose what you're doing, not be transparent, is to make your bill as complicated as possible, is, it's a business model. A lot of companies do it, but it hasn't made, the idea that it would be very easy for you to really understand what your technology costs are, to align to business value, make it easy to understand, make it easy for you to make good business decisions and technology decisions. We just haven't advanced in that space. There's been some things here and there, but we really, as a whole, I think if you asked most people and you said, hey, is cloud billing easy to understand? Are you, is it easy for you to map that to business value creation or business value decision making? They're still going to say no. It's still super, super complicated. Second thing I have in my glass half full. So fourth item on here, second glass half full. I think we overall as an industry have a new appreciation, an overall appreciation for the power of software and the power of software development to really change businesses and markets, right? I think we've been through the software's eating the world. We've seen, software, developers are the new kingmakers. We've sort of seen all those things. We've also seen the power of software through things like open source to, potentially be disruptive to markets. Some people might argue, destructive to markets. We've seen ourselves struggle with, how to get from technology to business model, or technology to profitability for software. But software has gone through a tremendous evolution over the last 10, 12, 15 years in terms of its ability to deliver unbelievable capabilities that used to be proprietary, used to be locked up in hardware, used to be extremely complicated for people to put together. We've seen more and more people be reliant on software, do interesting new things, and create differentiation through software, and for companies to really have an appreciation for, what happens when you truly harness the ability to build software and apply it in really useful, novel, interesting ways, differentiated ways, to really create unique business, unique capabilities and services for your business. So I think we very much have a new appreciation for what's possible with software, and we have much higher expectations for what we can do with it when we do it well. Third thing in my glass half empty, fifth one on the list. I don't think we've really figured out how to, kind of the inverse to number four, the corollary to number four. We still haven't figured out how to normalize great software development, right? We've gone more than a decade, of the, hey, 10 deployments in a day and DevOps and, all these types of things. We've been through, 10 different iterations of paths and definitions of those things. And I don't think we've really, we really haven't normalized great software development. We have plenty of examples, whether you're looking at the DORA reports every year, the state of DevOps, whatever, the sort of highest performers. But that number is still a very, very small percentage. And I think if you talk to most companies, and even if you talk to most software developers, they would tell you there are still high levels of frustration. There are still big barriers that get in the way of building great software, of doing it at high velocity, of being able to make changes in ways that don't feel like you're building on brittle software bases. So, for all of the DevOps talks and all of the, dependencies we now have on software, I don't think as a whole, in the same way that we still don't really know how to measure the cost of technology, I don't think we've normalized what it means to, put the culture, put the processes in place, to really, really normalize great software development so that it's available where it's being, put in use. It's available to people, but being put in use in high volumes, right? More than 40, 50, 60% of companies. I think we're still, the haves are far smaller than the have-nots in terms of really great software development. Third thing on my list for glass half full, and the good category, number 6 total. I think open source communities and the vehicles that we use to communicate around those, to market them, to make them well known to people. So things like the CNCF, and I'm not necessarily like praising the concept of foundations, but I think the mechanisms that we have to bring people together around open source communities have really provided a blueprint for how to go about bringing new innovation to the marketplace, right? And by that, I mean, there are always lots of ideas, but I think what we saw over the last decade, whether it was innovation that was coming out of, what we now sort of call hyperscaler or, Silicon Valley giant companies, whether it was coming out of LinkedIn or Twitter or Uber or Lyft or wherever, Google or whatever it might be, we saw a ton of innovation coming from there. But we also saw lots of innovation coming from, Spotify and, all sorts of, places, music companies and other types of things in which the technology was being used internally, was solving interesting problems. And we saw more and more of that come out. And then as, there was sort of the marriage of venture capital, which is always sort of there, but it needs to be in a way that can then have some sort of path to go to market, or at least, be visible in the marketplace. And then things like the CNCF, with things like KubeCon and Cloud Native Con and other things, really have given a vehicle and a path to show people that, hey, if you have great ideas and you're doing it in software, and if you're doing it in open source and you want communities to be around with it, there are vehicles to sort of get that started, to jump started. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to give you a path to monetization, right? I think we still, there's still a lot of struggle for how do you go about doing that, right? How do you balance sort of open and free and community and then wanting to monetize that? And we've hashed that out a million times in this show, but I think the path to bringing innovation to the marketplace, to the people, to the masses, has been very, very well defined. And we'll see if that continues. Just kind of given where VCs are today and the cost of things like AI and their debates about whether they're on the big side of tech or the small side of tech or the little side of tech or whatever those things might be over the next couple of years. But the foundation's been put in place that if you want to bring innovation to the marketplace, the vehicles to help you do that, whether again it's going to be GitHub and Hugging Face or other types of things or foundations, a lot of those roads have been paved over the last decade or so. All right, last two, one glass half empty, one glass half full. Last one for the glass half empty, number 7 on the list. And this is more of an observation. I don't know that I have a metric for this, but we saw how long it took for cloud to be disruptive, right? So, and I've covered this on a number of shows. I probably should put it in the show notes. But, if you go back, so AWS got started in 2006, 2007 timeframe. it took till nearly, I want to say, I remember right, 2013 or 2014, before it became a billion-dollar or broken out business in AWS, right? And it might have been later than that. It might have been 15 or something along those lines. So we went 7, 8, 9 years, maybe almost a decade before it was a really, really viable business, right? And people knew before that it was disruptive as a business, but they didn't really know how viable it was as a business, and they had no idea how impactful it was going to be to companies like AWS or eventually Azure, or even, to a certain extent Google and so forth. So that was a very, very long period of time. Let's call it a decade before we truly understood the level of disruption that cloud had. And while we all saw that, and for many of us, we experienced all of it, it does feel like because of how much cloud and the capabilities of cloud inflated the value of a number of companies. We have now very, very short levels of patience, very, very short windows in which we expect the next disruption, the next generation of disruption to become fruitful. And again, this might just be the sort of natural evolution of every thing, whether it was the internet, which sort of took off and then went through its bubble period and then obviously has grown up. Cloud didn't necessarily feel like it went through a bubble period per se. It was this sort of slow burn for a long time, and then it obviously ratcheted up. And maybe the bubble period for it was during COVID, when it grew so fast, and then people thought it could grow even more than it did. But it does feel like we're kind of, as we're looking at this next generation, and again, AI tends to be the sort of the tip of spear of it. We seem to have very little patience and very little understanding that this level of disruption is probably not going to happen, at least from a monetary profitability level, for many, many years. And it's likely not going to be in 2 years. It's not going to be in 3 years. It may not be in 5 or 6 or 7 years. But people are already starting to lose patience, it feels like, with how fast, for the amount of money that was spent on AI, which was a tremendous, tremendous amount of money, versus, the early days of cloud, in which we fawned over, spending $1 billion in a year, and now people are spending tens of $billions in a year to build up these things. It does feel like there's a different level of patience for this new disruption. And I think, sometimes, I'm always a kind of a pundit of, technology history tends to repeat itself. It doesn't always rhyme, but it tends to repeat itself. Be a student of history in terms of, your level of patience, your level of expectations with the next disruption that comes along, whether it's AI or something else. Last thing on my list, number 4, number 8 overall, number 4 on the glasses half full. And I'll wrap up with this. I think the cloud way of doing things, right, where automation is the first thing that you're thinking about. We have to automate these things. You're thinking about scale. How do I take advantage of scale? And you don't worry that scale is going to become this tremendous barrier for you. You just sort of assume that scale will be figured out. The ability to experiment, the ability to be open to experimenting with new technology, and not necessarily always only building on the previous building blocks, right? So things like, the explosion of the database market, where we went from, just SQL to time series to, the 10 or 12 different ways that people talk about databases today. The cloud way of doing things has laid the foundation very much, whether it's in the public cloud, and we've seen, the rise of 3, 4, 5 very, very viable public clouds, to, sort of the second iteration of private cloud, where we're seeing more and more people who are bringing the things they learn from public cloud back into their private clouds. We've seen that space grow and continue to evolve. But I think the cloud way of doing things, experimentation, fast iteration, willingness to experiment with new technologies, willing to think about scale in new ways, I think that lays a really, really good foundation for, again, whatever comes next, this next generation that comes next. And so, it's good that we've had, while I said at the beginning, it does feel like enterprise IT has gone somewhat backwards, or maybe hasn't kept pace with cloud. I do think the resources that have been focused on cloud will be maybe the new iteration of what enterprise IT looks like, right? Especially for the new things. And maybe we're realizing after a decade plus, sort of the idea of fast and slow within the same IT organization is okay, right? Bimodal is okay. So anyways, with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you all for allowing my daughter to kick off the show. That was fun for me, something I've wanted to do for a long time. I'm glad she gets to do that. Thanks for letting me, kind of go down memory lane a little bit and think about the evolution over the last decade plus that we've been doing the podcast, but also just, all of you that have been part of this industry. And I think sometimes it's good for us, especially when we have a little bit of a lull. August tends to be sort of a lull month in terms of people doing vacations and kids get back to school, and there's not a whole lot of technology announcements and so forth. But I think it is good sometimes when we have some lulls to be reflective on where we've been and whether there are things that we can learn from where we've been as we think about where we're going. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for putting up with Aaron and I being a little bit, bouncing around on the shows the last few weeks. We've been traveling quite a bit. I'm going to be traveling again this weekend, but hopefully you all are doing well. Hopefully as you're getting ready to kind of get back into the swing of things, for those of you that have kids and are, getting ready to go back to school, whether they are 3 years old, 4 years old, like Aaron and I's were when we first started the podcast, or they're somewhere, going off to college, going off to middle school, going to high school, or, maybe they're growing up and they're bigger than that. So anyways, thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend about the show. Thanks for, always sending us feedback and always being positive with us about things and for helping us grow the podcast. So thank you very much. We'll talk to you next week.